What if I told you that the very foods you think are harmless, even the ones that were once advertised as healthy, could be silently destroying your vision right now? Here's the shocking truth. 99% of people over 60 don't realize that some of the most common processed foods are slowly damaging their eyes. We blame blurry vision, trouble reading, or struggling to drive at night on just getting older. But in reality, much of that decline is fueled by what's on your plate, not the number on your birth certificate. Some folks believe poor eyesight after 60 is inevitable. There's nothing you can do. Others argue it's entirely preventable if you make the right choices. After treating thousands of patients, I can tell you, both sides are wrong. Aging plays a role, yes, but your daily diet has far more power than most people ever imagine. And the good news? That means you're not powerless. In today's video, I'm going to expose 5 processed foods that look innocent but are quietly raising your risk of glaucoma, speeding up cataracts, and even fueling macular degeneration. And let me warn you, the number one culprit is something almost every household in America has sitting in their kitchen right now. So if you want to protect your eyesight, stay independent, and keep seeing the faces you love clearly for years to come. You'll want to watch this until the very end, because once vision is gone, there's no turning back. But before we dive in, do me a quick favor, hit that like button, share this video with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Every click gives us the motivation to bring you more life-changing health information you won't find anywhere else. Now, let's get started. Why vision decline isn't just old age. When people reach their 60s, it's common to hear, "My eyes just aren't what they used to be, it must be age." But the truth is, most of the vision problems we see in older adults are not simply the result of getting older. They are heavily influenced by diet and lifestyle, which means you have more control over your eyesight than you may realize. Take age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. For example, it is the leading cause of vision loss in Americans over 60, affecting more than 11 million people today, a number expected to double by 2050. AMD damages the macula, the part of the retina responsible for sharp central vision. For someone with AMD, reading the newspaper or recognizing a loved one's face becomes a challenge. While genetics play a role, studies show diets high in processed foods and unhealthy fats dramatically increase oxidative stress, essentially speeding up the rusting of retinal cells. Cataracts are another major issue. By the time Americans reach 80, more than half either have cataracts or have had surgery to remove them. Cataracts cloud the lens of the eye, turning the world into a foggy picture. Elevated blood sugar from a diet high in refined carbs and sweets causes proteins in the lens to clump together, which accelerates cataract formation. On the flip side, antioxidants like vitamin C, lutein, and zeaxanthin can slow this process, showing how much of a role nutrition really plays. And then there's glaucoma, the so-called silent thief of sight. More than 3 million Americans are living with it right now, yet half don't even know they have it. Glaucoma often develops without warning, causing gradual but irreversible vision loss. One of its biggest risk factors is high eye pressure, and research has found a strong connection between excessive sodium in the diet and elevated eye pressure. That means every salty snack, every bowl of instant noodles, every processed frozen meal may be quietly raising your risk. Here's what most people don't realize. AMD, cataracts, and glaucoma may look like 3 different diseases, but they share the same root causes: oxidative stress, poor circulation, chronic inflammation, and unstable blood sugar. And all 4 of those are made worse by a diet heavy in processed foods. Every time you eat a sugar-filled pastry or drink a soda, your blood sugar spikes and damages the fragile vessels in your retina. Every time you reach for a salty snack, your eye pressure can climb higher. And each serving of hydrogenated oils or trans fats stirs up more inflammation that chips away at your eye health. Large-scale research backs this up. Harvard followed over 100,000 men and women for 2 decades, and found that those who ate the most processed foods had a significantly greater risk of vision loss than those who focused on whole, nutrient-rich meals. That's not coincidence. It's a clear signal that what we eat today shapes how well we see tomorrow. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you thought about how dinner might affect your eyesight 5 or 10 years from now? We often think about food in terms of heart health, cholesterol, or weight, but rarely about how it influences our vision. Yet the eyes are just as sensitive to diet as the heart or the brain. As a physician who has cared for thousands of patients, I can tell you the ones who keep their vision the longest aren't just lucky. They are the ones who make conscious choices every day, swapping processed foods for whole ones, keeping blood sugar and blood pressure under control, and giving their bodies the nutrients needed to fight oxidative stress. Vision decline isn't just old age. It's often the result of years of silent damage from the foods we choose. And that's why it's so important to uncover the everyday culprits, the 5 processed foods that may already be sitting in your kitchen, quietly stealing your eyesight. Let's break them down. Number 5, deli meats and cold cuts. Ham sandwiches, turkey slices, and salami at family gatherings may feel like comfort foods, familiar, convenient, and quick. But when it comes to your eyes, these processed meats are far more harmful than most people realize. Inside every slice is a chemical cocktail: sodium nitrite, preservatives, hidden sugars, and heavy amounts of salt. Sodium is one of the biggest culprits here. It raises blood pressure, and when blood pressure climbs, it puts enormous stress on the tiny, delicate blood vessels that nourish your retina. Over time, those fragile vessels weaken, rupture, or close off completely, depriving your eyes of the blood supply they need. That's how vision loss begins, not overnight, but quietly, meal by meal. Preservatives like nitrates and nitrites add another layer of damage. Once inside the body, they can form compounds called nitrosamines, which increase oxidative stress. Think of oxidative stress like rust forming on metal. It eats away at the health of your retinal cells. Over time, this accelerates age-related macular degeneration, one of the most feared causes of blindness in older adults. The science is clear. A study in investigative ophthalmology and visual science showed that seniors with diets high in sodium had a significantly greater risk of glaucoma, a disease often called the silent thief of sight. And it doesn't take much. Regularly consuming deli meats and cold cuts a few times per week can be enough to keep blood pressure and eye pressure elevated. Another study published in Hypertension followed over 500 older adults and found that those with higher sodium intake had nearly double the rate of vision-threatening eye disease compared to those who kept sodium in check. Let me share a story from my own practice. Mr. Lewis, 72, came to me complaining that his peripheral vision was shrinking. He had no pain, no redness, just a subtle narrowing of his field of view. When I reviewed his diet, I noticed he ate a ham sandwich for lunch nearly every day. Over the years, that habit had quietly pushed his eye pressure higher and higher until it began damaging his optic nerve. Once we cut out the deli meats and replaced them with roasted chicken breast and beans, his blood pressure and eye pressure began to stabilize. He didn't just save his eyesight, he regained confidence in his daily life, like driving at night and walking without fear of bumping into things. And Mr. Lewis isn't unique. I've seen dozens of patients in their 60s and 70s who thought they were eating light by having turkey or ham sandwiches, only to discover that the preservatives and sodium inside those slices were accelerating their vision problems. So let me ask you, when was the last time you looked closely at what's in your sandwich meat? Have you checked the sodium content or thought about how many additives you're really putting into your body? We often worry about heart health when it comes to salt, but your eyes are just as sensitive to it. Here's my advice after more than 40 years in medicine. If you enjoy sandwiches, make them work for you instead of against you. Roast turkey breast or chicken at home, slice it yourself, and season it with herbs instead of preservatives. Pair it with fresh vegetables, add a spread of hummus or avocado for flavor, and you'll have a meal that supports your eyes rather than harms them. Because every bite you take is either moving you closer to preserving your vision or quietly pushing you toward losing it. And the truth is, those small daily choices matter more than most people realize. Number 4. Packaged baked goods, donuts, cakes, pastries. That glazed donut or store-bought muffin may seem like a small pleasure, a sweet way to start the morning or end the evening, but for your eyes it's far from harmless. These packaged treats are packed with refined sugar, unhealthy oils, and artificial additives that slowly chip away at your vision. Every time you eat one, your blood sugar spikes, and those spikes damage the tiny vessels in your retina. Over time, this leads to diabetic retinopathy, a condition where fragile retinal vessels leak, bleed, and scar. The result? Blurred vision, dark spots, and in severe cases, blindness. Trans fats are another danger hidden in many packaged baked goods. They're used to extend shelf life and keep pastries soft, but inside your body they trigger chronic inflammation. In the eyes, this inflammation weakens the protective layers of the retina and accelerates age-related macular degeneration. According to the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, diets high in refined sugar raise the risk of AMD by as much as 40%. Another study in the British Journal of Ophthalmology found that older adults who regularly consumed trans fats had a significantly higher rate of advanced vision loss compared to those who limited them. I remember Mrs. Carter, age 69, who enjoyed 2 cupcakes almost every night. At first, it was just a habit she thought was harmless. But a few years later, she was diagnosed with early-stage macular degeneration. When we replaced her nightly sweets with Greek yogurt, fresh berries, and a few squares of dark chocolate, her condition stabilized, and she regained energy she hadn't felt in years. Another patient, Mr. Johnson, 74, used to keep a box of packaged donuts on his counter. He believed fruit raised his blood sugar more than pastries, so he avoided apples and berries but ate donuts daily. When he came to me complaining of blurry vision, his blood work showed prediabetes, and an eye exam revealed signs of retinal damage. After changing his snacks to walnuts and blueberries, not only did his vision stop deteriorating, but his blood sugar improved as well. So let me ask you this. Do you ever reach for a packaged pastry because it feels quick and easy? Have you thought about what it's doing to your eyes in the long run? The sugar crash you feel an hour later is only the tip of the iceberg. The real damage is silent, happening inside the retina, and by the time symptoms appear, much of the harm is already done. Here's my advice after decades of caring for older adults. If you want something sweet, make it work for you, not against you. Choose fresh berries, which are rich in antioxidants that protect the retina. Reach for dark chocolate with at least 70% cocoa, which contains flavonoids that improve blood flow to the eyes. Or make simple oatmeal cookies at home with oats, nuts, and a touch of honey instead of processed sugar. These choices not only satisfy your sweet tooth, but also strengthen your vision. In the end, every snack is a decision. It can either feed inflammation and speed up eye disease, or it can nourish and protect your sight. The choice is yours, and your future self will thank you for it. Number 3. Instant noodles and salty snacks. Instant noodles, chips, and other salty snacks are cheap, quick, and familiar, but when it comes to your eyes, they are far more harmful than convenient. These foods are packed with excessive sodium, MSG, and low-quality processed oils. The problem with sodium is that it doesn't just raise blood pressure. It also raises intraocular pressure, which is one of the biggest risk factors for glaucoma. Glaucoma is often called the silent thief of sight because it causes gradual vision loss without symptoms until it's too late. Every time you slurp down a bowl of instant ramen or polish off a bag of chips, you're adding fuel to that pressure. It's not only the sodium. Most salty snacks and instant noodles are fried or made with refined vegetable oils that are high in omega-6 fatty acids. While your body needs some omega-6s, the imbalance created by too many processed oils and not enough omega-3s leads to chronic inflammation. In the retina, that inflammation weakens cells, disrupts circulation, and accelerates age-related macular degeneration. A 2021 study in the Nutrients Journal confirmed this, showing that diets high in processed sodium foods increased glaucoma risk by nearly 30%. Another study from the Journal of Ophthalmology linked diets rich in processed snack foods to faster progression of retinal degeneration. I'll share a story from my own experience. Helen, 74, relied on instant ramen several nights a week. She lived alone and thought a quick warm bowl of noodles was an easy dinner. Over time, her eye pressure began to rise, and her optometrist noticed early signs of glaucoma. When we swapped the ramen for quinoa tossed with vegetables and olive oil, not only did her eye pressure normalize, but she reported feeling less bloated and more energetic. Another patient, Mr. Daniels, 68, had a habit of snacking on salted chips and pretzels every evening while watching TV. Within a few years, he developed high blood pressure and was diagnosed with ocular hypertension, a precursor to glaucoma. Once he reduced processed snacks and replaced them with roasted chickpeas and unsalted nuts, his eye pressure stabilized, and he felt less dependent on his blood pressure medication. Now ask yourself this: how often do you reach for a salty snack because it's sitting in the pantry? Do you ever consider how that handful of chips could be raising the pressure inside your eyes? These foods don't announce the damage they are doing. The harm builds slowly, quietly, and by the time vision changes occur, it's often too late to reverse. My advice after decades of seeing how diet impacts eye health is to choose foods that nourish rather than sabotage your eyesight. Instead of instant noodles, opt for whole wheat pasta, quinoa, or brown rice topped with vegetables and a drizzle of olive oil. If you crave something crunchy, try air-popped popcorn without excess salt, roasted chickpeas, or a handful of unsalted almonds. These swaps may feel small, but they protect the delicate balance of your eyes, lower inflammation, and support the circulation that keeps your vision sharp. Every meal and every snack is a choice. You can choose the quick comfort of instant noodles and chips, knowing they push your eyes toward higher risk, or you can choose whole, nourishing alternatives that help preserve your vision for years to come. Number 2, sugary drinks, soda, sweetened juices. That can of soda may seem refreshing, but for your eyes it's more dangerous than you think. Sugary drinks like sodas, sweetened iced teas, and fruit juices are loaded with high-fructose corn syrup, caffeine, and phosphates. The immediate effect is a sharp rise in blood sugar, which over time damages the fragile blood vessels in your retina. This is how diabetic retinopathy develops. The vessels leak, bleed, and scar, leaving behind blurred or distorted vision. Phosphates add another problem by stripping calcium from your body, which weakens the overall structure of the eye and may accelerate conditions like cataracts. The evidence is strong. Research published in JAMA found that people with high soda intake had a 61% greater risk of developing diabetic retinopathy. Another large study from the British Journal of Nutrition showed that older adults who regularly consumed sweetened beverages had a higher likelihood of developing both cataracts and macular degeneration compared to those who avoided them. The problem is not just the sugar itself, but the frequency of consumption. A soda with lunch, juice in the afternoon, and sweetened tea at night adds up to a constant assault on your retinal blood vessels. I remember Mr. Patel, age 65, who drank orange soda every day. By the time he turned 70, he developed retinal bleeding that required laser treatment. When he finally replaced the soda with green tea and sparkling water, his blood sugar stabilized and the progression of his eye damage slowed. Another patient, Mrs. Lopez, 67, believed fruit juice was a healthy choice, so she drank a large glass of sweetened apple juice every morning. Within a few years, her eye exams revealed early diabetic changes, even though she had never been diagnosed with diabetes. Once she switched to lemon water and added more whole fruit to her diet, her blood sugar improved and the damage stopped advancing. So let me ask you, how often do you reach for soda, juice, or sweetened tea without thinking about it? Do you consider what those repeated sugar spikes are doing to your vision? The truth is, these drinks don't just quench thirst, they slowly erode your eye health glass by glass. After decades of treating patients, my advice is straightforward. Skip the sugary drinks and choose options that work for your eyes instead of against them. Unsweetened green tea is rich in antioxidants that protect the retina. Lemon water hydrates while supporting collagen in the eye. Sparkling water with a few berries adds flavor without the sugar overload. These simple swaps protect your vision, stabilize your blood sugar, and keep your eyes stronger for longer. Each drink you choose is either feeding the fire of vision loss or protecting the sight you depend on every day. The decision may seem small, but its impact on your future is enormous. Number 1. Margarine and hydrogenated oils. This one surprises many people. For decades, margarine was advertised as the heart-healthy alternative to butter. But when it comes to your eyes, it is one of the most toxic choices you can make. Margarine and other products made with hydrogenated oils are packed with trans fats, which not only harm your cardiovascular system, but also directly affect your vision. These fats block the absorption of omega-3 fatty acids, nutrients that are critical for maintaining a healthy retina. Without enough omega-3, the delicate cells in your macula and retina become more vulnerable to damage. Over time, this increases the risk of age-related macular degeneration and speeds up the progression of cataracts. The research is striking. A large study published in the British Journal of Ophthalmology found that seniors who consumed diets high in trans fats had a 70% higher risk of developing advanced macular degeneration compared to those who kept their intake low. Another study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that people who replaced healthy fats with hydrogenated oils had higher rates of cataract formation and poorer visual acuity as they aged. These findings confirm what I've seen for years in my own patients. The type of fat you eat makes a huge difference in how well your eyes age. I'll never forget Mary, a 76-year-old patient who had faithfully switched from butter to margarine back in the 1980s because she believed it was better for her heart. Within a few years, her macular degeneration worsened at a much faster rate than expected. When we re-examined her diet and removed margarine, replacing it with small amounts of grass-fed butter and olive oil, the progression of her disease slowed noticeably. Another patient, Mr. Harris, 71, used margarine daily on toast and for cooking. He developed early cataracts and significant dry eye symptoms. After we replaced margarine with avocado oil and encouraged more omega-3 rich foods like salmon and flax seeds, not only did his dry eyes improve, but his cataract progression slowed as well. So let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to consider what kind of oil you're actually cooking with? Do you know whether the spreads in your fridge contain hydrogenated oils or hidden trans fats? Many people don't look beyond the low cholesterol or light label, but the truth is that what's inside can quietly damage your vision year after year. My advice after decades of watching the long-term effects is to keep your fats clean and simple. Use extra virgin olive oil for cooking and salads, avocado oil for high-heat dishes, and if you enjoy butter, choose small amounts of grass-fed butter instead of margarine. These fats don't just taste better. They nourish your eyes, support healthy cell membranes, and protect against inflammation. Remember, your choice of fat may feel small in the moment, but it can be the difference between sharp, clear eyesight and progressive vision loss as the years go by. So let's take a moment to recap. We've uncovered the truth about 5 common processed foods: deli meats, packaged baked goods, instant noodles and salty snacks, sugary drinks, and finally margarine with hydrogenated oils. Each one may look harmless, but over time they can quietly damage your retina, raise your risk of glaucoma, speed up cataracts, and fuel age-related macular degeneration. The good news is, you don't have to give in to this silent decline. By swapping these foods for healthier choices, fresh vegetables, berries, whole grains, healthy oils, and omega-3 rich foods, you can give your eyes the protection they deserve. Remember this, poor vision after 60 is not just old age. It's often the result of years of hidden damage from what's on our plate. That means every meal, every snack, every drink is a chance to protect your independence, your clarity, and the ability to see the people and moments that matter most. Now I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 5 foods surprised you the most? Leave your answer in the comments below. Your story might just inspire someone else to make a change. And if you found value in today's video, please don't forget to hit the like button, share it with friends or family, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating life-changing health content for people just like you. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care of your eyes, and I'll see you in the next video.